Let's do this. Let's close out our discussion regarding the phosphorus cycle. So here in front of you is the phosphorus cycle again. We talked about up to this point in the previous videos, the soluble phase or phases that are taken up by plants. We taught you that phosphorus loves to be loved in soils, and this concentration in the soil solution phase is rather small because phosphorus loves to be loved, and it's loved by mineral surfaces of clays and iron and aluminum oxides and carbonates, and it loves to be loved via the formation of secondary mineral phases, and it loves to be loved by being bound in microbial tissue. We talked about the fact that the amount of phosphorus that's taken up and removed by crops is rather low. We really didn't touch on leaching, but leaching can be typically minor, but sometimes major if there's no place in the soil for phosphorus to be loved, i.e., if many of these phases over here on the right-hand side are currently occupied by phosphorus that was placed into the soil over years, if not decades. Sometimes we call this legacy phosphorus in the environment. Okay. But we really didn't talk about leaching, but it does occur. And it most likely occurs here around Lake Erie. Next, we talked about runoff and erosion. This dominates phosphorus loss from any given system. And we talked about the ramifications of losses because of phosphorus moving with runoff and erosion. So there's some key points to the phosphorus cycle that I want you to record. So here are the key points. Number one, that the soil solution phosphorus phase is controlled by inorganic solid phases and mineralization of organic phosphorus. The solution phase is controlled by adsorbed phosphorus, which is in direct equilibrium with the solution phase, and it's partially controlled by the dissolution of minerals or from the kicking off of phosphorus from exchange sites or the cleaving of orthophosphate from organic compounds. But oftentimes when phosphorus is pumped into the soil solution, it doesn't stay there and it loves to be loved and it ends up back in some of the other phases that you see on the diagram below. Point number two, look at the loss pathways. The loss pathways of phosphorus from any system is via plant uptake and crop harvest, certainly runoff and erosion, and depending on where you're located, leaching. Leaching is oftentimes minor unless the locations where phosphorus can be loved in a soil are occupied. So what don't you see on this diagram that is a loss pathway that you saw in the nitrogen diagram or cycle? You don't see any gaseous losses. There are no gaseous losses of phosphorus from soils. Point number three, leaching losses are limited to extreme cases, right? Coarser textured soils. Runoff and erosion losses are definitely more common, but it's not on this slide, but I can tell you that when the locations where phosphorus loves to be loved are occupied by phosphorus from legacy phosphorus additions, that phosphorus can leach. And I'll tell you that on a grand scale, sediment carried with runoff is the major environmental issue with respect to phosphorus loss and movement into water bodies. And that brings us to the end of our description of the phosphorus cycle.